The late afternoon sunlight poured through the large windows of a small-town diner, casting warm, golden streaks across the checkered floor. The place was quiet but not empty, a mix of locals sitting in booths, chatting lazily over coffee and plates of pie. A bell jingled as the door swung open, and Elon Musk stepped in, wearing a plain hoodie and jeans, his face partially obscured by a baseball cap. He was here for a brief stopover, trying to enjoy some anonymity in a town far removed from his usual world of cameras and corporate meetings. As Elon scanned the room for an empty seat, his eyes landed on a black family standing at the counter, a man, a woman, and their young daughter. The man looked to be in his late 30s, his shoulders broad but slightly hunched, as if weighed down by years of quiet struggles. His wife stood beside him, her hand resting gently on their daughter's shoulder. The little girl, no older than 8, clung to a worn backpack decorated with stickers of planets and stars, her eyes darting nervously around the room. "Excuse me," the mother said politely to the waitress behind the counter. "Could we get a table for 3? The waitress barely glanced up from her order pad. Her expression was cold, her tone curt. "We're full right now." Elon's brows furrowed as he instinctively glanced around the diner. Half the tables were empty, their surfaces gleaming under the light. There was no reason for the family to be turned away. The mother exchanged a look with her husband. "Are you sure? We don't mind waiting if one opens up," she added, her voice kind but tinged with unease. "We're fully booked," the waitress said again, this time with a sharp edge. She picked up a coffee pot and walked away as if the conversation was over. The father's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, his hand moving to his daughter's shoulder in a comforting gesture. The little girl looked up at him, confused but quiet, as though she had been taught not to ask questions in situations like these. The mother hesitated, glancing at the empty booths, then back at the waitress. Her voice wavered slightly as she said, "We don't understand. I said we're full." The waitress interrupted loudly, her tone carrying enough venom to silence the room. A few patrons turned their heads, some frowning, others quickly looking away as if they didn't want to get involved. The father's face hardened, but he gently guided his wife and daughter toward the door. "Let's go," he said softly. "It's not worth it." As they turned to leave, Elon felt a flicker of anger rising in his chest. He had been trying to keep a low profile, but this wasn't something he could ignore. Standing up, he crossed the room in a few long strides, his presence immediately commanding attention. "Excuse me," he said, his voice calm but firm as he addressed the waitress. "Why aren't you seating them?" The waitress froze mid-step, startled by the interruption. She turned to face him, her expression shifting to a forced smile when she realized she was speaking to a customer. "Like I told them, we're full," she said, but her tone lacked the confidence it had before. Elon gestured toward the empty booths. "It doesn't look full to me." The tension in the room thickened. The diner manager, a stout man in his 50s with a gruff demeanor, emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, looking between Elon and the waitress. "Yes, there is," Elon replied, his voice steady but unyielding. "This family asked for a table, and they were turned away despite the diner being half empty. Can you explain why?" The manager's eyes flicked toward the family, who had stopped near the door, uncertain whether to leave or stay. His face hardened as he looked back at Elon. "We have the right to refuse service to anyone." "Based on what?" Elon asked, his tone sharp. "Because it seems pretty obvious to me that they're being turned away for no valid reason." The manager squared his shoulders, clearly not accustomed to being challenged. "I don't have to explain myself to you, sir. If you got a problem, you're welcome to leave." The mother's cheeks flushed with embarrassment as she tugged gently on her husband's sleeve. "Let's just go," she whispered, her voice barely audible. But Elon wasn't backing down. He turned to the family, his gaze softening. "Please stay. You shouldn't have to leave because of this." The father hesitated, torn between protecting his family from further humiliation and standing up for what was right. Finally, he nodded. "All right," he said quietly. The mother and daughter exchanged a nervous glance, but followed his lead. They moved toward one of the empty booths, guided by Elon, while the waitress and manager stood frozen, unsure of how to proceed. The other patrons watched in stunned silence, some pulling out their phones to record the unfolding scene. "Now," Elon said, turning back to the waitress and manager, his voice carrying a weight of authority, "I suggest you do your job and serve this family like you would anyone else." The waitress hesitated, glancing nervously at the manager, who gave a reluctant nod. Grudgingly, she grabbed a menu and approached the family's table, placing it down with a forced smile. "What can I get you?" she asked, her voice dripping with insincerity. The mother gave her a polite nod, trying to mask her discomfort as she opened the menu for her daughter. The little girl clutched her backpack tightly, her wide eyes darting between Elon and her parents. Elon slid into the booth opposite the family, offering them a reassuring smile. "Don't worry," he said. "You deserve to be here as much as anyone else." The father exhaled slowly, his shoulders relaxing for the first time. "Thank you," he said, his voice low but sincere. As the waitress walked away to place their order, the murmurs in the diner grew louder. Some patrons whispered among themselves. Others stared openly, their expressions a mix of curiosity and discomfort. A few people began typing on their phones, and within minutes, the first video of the incident was uploaded online. Elon ignored the stares and leaned forward to speak with the family. "I'm sorry you had to go through that," he said. "What's your name?" "I'm Marcus," the father replied, extending a hand. "This is my wife, Anita, and our daughter, Layla." "It's nice to meet you," Elon said, shaking Marcus's hand firmly. He turned to Layla and smiled. "I like your backpack. Are those planets?" Layla nodded shyly. "I love space," she said in a small voice. "I want to be a scientist." Elon's face lit up. "That's a great dream. You know, I work on rockets. Maybe one day, you'll build your own." Layla's eyes widened with excitement, her earlier fear momentarily forgotten. Anita and Marcus exchanged a look of cautious gratitude, realizing that this moment might be more significant than they had anticipated. Outside, the sound of sirens broke through the growing crowd of onlookers gathering near the diner's windows. The world was already taking notice. Inside the diner, tension remained thick in the air as the Black family settled into their booth under Elon Musk's encouraging gaze. Layla, the young girl, still clutched her space-themed backpack as if it were a shield, her small hands tracing the edges of the worn fabric. Anita, her mother, glanced nervously at the staff, worried about retaliation for staying. Marcus, her husband, kept his eyes locked on Elon, silently thanking him for stepping in when they had nearly given up. But outside the diner, the situation was quickly escalating. A video of the incident, recorded by a diner patron who had been sitting nearby, was already making its rounds on social media. The clip, just under 2 minutes long, captured Elon Musk confronting the manager and waitress, calling out their discriminatory behavior in a calm but assertive tone. The words, "We have the right to refuse service to anyone," followed by Elon's biting response, "Based on what?" became the focal point of the video. Within minutes, hashtags like #DinerDiscrimination and #ElonTakesAStand started trending on Twitter. As the video spread like wildfire, reactions began pouring in. Comments ranged from outrage at the blatant racism displayed by the diner staff to admiration for Elon's bold stand. "This is the kind of allyship we need. Kudos to Elon Musk for using his platform to call out injustice where he sees it." At Social Justice Warrior, racism in 2024, and people still act surprised. Bravo to Elon for stepping in. But this is an everyday struggle for Black families. Time for real change. At Activist Voice, the diner manager and staff should be ashamed. Let's make sure this place never profits from bigotry again. #boycott this diner. At Angry Customer inside the diner, some patrons began glancing at their phones, their expressions shifting as they recognized the man sitting with the Black family. Whispers grew louder. "Is that Elon Musk? No way. Why would he be here? Check Twitter. It's him. He's trending right now." Unaware of the digital storm brewing outside, Elon continued to speak with the family. Layla's initial shyness began to melt away as Elon encouraged her dreams of becoming a scientist. "You know," he said, his tone warm and genuine, "when I was your age, I loved reading about space and science too. Never stop dreaming big, okay?" Layla's face lit up with a small but radiant smile. "Do you really work on rockets?" "I do," Elon replied with a nod. "And one day, I hope to see you working on them too." Anita and Marcus watched the exchange, their hearts swelling with a mix of gratitude and disbelief. They had walked into this diner feeling invisible and powerless, but now someone who could change the narrative was standing up for them. Outside, the diner parking lot was no longer quiet. A small crowd had started to gather, alerted by social media posts and live streams from curious onlookers. Some protesters arrived quickly, holding hastily made signs with slogans like "No room for racism" and "Serve justice, not hate." Local reporters soon followed, their cameras aimed at the diner's entrance. The diner's owner, sitting in his office in the back, was oblivious to the chaos at first. But when an employee burst in, breathless and panicked, he was shown the viral video that had amassed hundreds of thousands of views in less than an hour. His face turned pale. "What the hell is going on out there?" he demanded, storming toward the front of the diner. He pushed through the swinging kitchen doors and was greeted by the sight of Elon Musk sitting calmly with the Black family, as if nothing out of the ordinary was happening. The waitress stood near the counter, frozen in place, her face flushed with embarrassment. Customers whispered fervently, some still recording on their phones. Outside the windows, the growing crowd was unmistakable. The owner's voice cut through the murmur. "What's the meaning of this?" he barked, directing his words at the manager and waitress. Before anyone could respond, Elon stood up, towering over the owner with quiet authority. "The meaning of this," he said, his voice steady and sharp, "is that your staff discriminated against this family, and it won't be swept under the rug." The owner's bravado faltered as he realized who he was speaking to. His eyes widened. "Mr. Musk, I had no idea you were here," he stammered. "That's not the issue," Elon said, crossing his arms. "The issue is how this family was treated. You have a problem with racism in your establishment, and it needs to be addressed." The owner glanced nervously at the crowd outside, then at the phones recording every second of the interaction. "Look, I'm sure this is just a misunderstanding." "It's not a misunderstanding," Marcus interjected, his voice firm. He was done staying silent. "We were turned away for no reason other than the color of our skin." Anita placed a hand on his arm, but Marcus wasn't stopping. "We've been through this too many times before. This isn't new to us, but it's going to stop here." The owner swallowed hard, clearly struggling to maintain control of the situation. "I'll talk to my staff," he said weakly. "We'll handle it internally." "That's not good enough," Elon replied. "Your staff needs accountability, and your business needs to change, or there won't be a business left to run." Outside, the protesters grew louder, chanting slogans and demanding justice. The crowd had now swelled to dozens, and local police had arrived to manage traffic. Reporters began interviewing onlookers, while the diner's name trended alongside the viral video. Meanwhile, Elon took his seat again and refocused his attention on the family, refusing to let the owner's weak excuses detract from the moment. "You deserve better than this," he said to Marcus and Anita. "And I'll make sure this isn't the last time someone stands up for you." The waitress, now visibly shaken, brought over the family's food, setting the plates down with trembling hands. Layla looked at her parents, unsure whether it was okay to eat, but her mother nodded, offering her a small, reassuring smile. As they began to eat, Elon leaned in and said quietly, "When this goes public, and it already is, I'll make sure your story is heard. If you're comfortable with that, of course." Marcus nodded slowly. "We're tired of staying silent," he said. "Maybe it's time people hear what we've been through." Elon gave a small, approving nod. "Then let's make sure they do." By the time they finished their meal, the diner had become the epicenter of a national conversation. The family and Elon walked out together, greeted by cheers from the protesters and flashes from cameras. The video continued to spread, and within hours, the diner's discriminatory practices would become a symbol of the work still needed to fight systemic racism. But for the family, the moment marked the beginning of a new chapter, one where they finally felt seen, heard, and valued. Inside the diner, the air felt heavy with tension, but Elon Musk's calm presence brought a sense of reassurance to the Black family seated across from him. Layla, their bright-eyed daughter, sat with her hands in her lap, nervously swinging her feet. Her father, Marcus, shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his eyes darting around the room. Anita, his wife, sat beside him, her shoulders slightly hunched as if bracing herself for yet another humiliating encounter. Elon leaned forward, his tone warm but curious. "Tell me about yourselves," he said. "If you're comfortable, I'd like to hear your story." Anita exchanged a hesitant glance with Marcus. They weren't used to being asked this question. Most people didn't care enough to listen. Finally, Marcus nodded. "We're just an ordinary family," he began, his voice steady but laced with weariness. "But I guess for people around here, we stand out more than we'd like." Elon remained silent, his eyes attentive, urging Marcus to continue. "I've been a mechanic for most of my life," Marcus said. "I know cars inside and out, but it hasn't been easy. I've applied to jobs at bigger shops in town, the kind that could pay better and give us some stability," but he trailed off, his jaw tightening. "They never call back. And when they do, it's always the same excuse. We've filled the position, or you're not a good fit." "But I know what they mean." Anita placed a hand on Marcus's arm, her expression soft yet pained. "It's not just him," she added. "I've been working as an assistant manager at a retail store for 10 years. I've trained new hires, helped boost sales, done everything they've asked me to do. But when it comes time for promotions, they always skip over me. They bring in someone new, someone younger and less experienced, but someone who doesn't look like me." Her voice faltered, but she straightened her shoulders, unwilling to show weakness. "I've stopped expecting fairness. It's easier that way." Elon's expression hardened slightly, though he kept his tone measured. "That must be exhausting," he said, "to work so hard and still feel invisible." Anita nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. "It is," she admitted. "But what choice do we have? We have to keep going." For her, she glanced at Layla, who was quietly listening, her wide eyes absorbing every word. Elon turned to Layla, softening his voice. "And you? What do you think about all this?" Layla hesitated, clutching the straps of her backpack. "Sometimes I don't understand," she said shyly. "Like why people don't like us. We didn't do anything wrong." Anita reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind Layla's ear. "It's not your fault, baby," she said. "Some people just don't know how to treat others with kindness." Layla looked down at her hands, then back up at Elon. "At school, some kids don't talk to me. They say I'm different. One time, a boy called me a name. I told the teacher, but she just said to ignore it." Her voice wavered, but she quickly added, "It's okay, though. I don't care." Marcus frowned deeply, his fists clenching slightly under the table. "She shouldn't have to not care," he said, his voice low but firm. "She's 8 years old. She should be able to just be a kid, not deal with this nonsense." Elon nodded, his mind racing with thoughts. He had always known systemic racism was a pervasive issue, but hearing their personal struggles put it into sharper focus. It wasn't just about the denial of service at the diner. It was about an entire system that had conditioned this family to expect less, to shrink themselves to fit into a society that refused to see their worth. "I'm sorry you've had to deal with this," Elon said sincerely. "None of this is okay." Marcus let out a bitter laugh. "You get used to it after a while. I mean, what can we do? Fight every time? Speak up every time? Most of the time, it's just easier to walk away." That's what we were about to do today. Walk away and pretend it didn't bother us. But deep down it does. Anita nodded in agreement. "It always does." There was a brief silence at the table, broken only by the faint clatter of dishes being washed in the kitchen. Elon took a deep breath, leaning slightly forward. "I don't think you should have to get used to it," he said firmly. "What happened today shouldn't happen to anyone. And I think it's time people start seeing that." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "People need to understand the everyday struggles you're dealing with," Elon explained. "It's not just about one diner or one rude waitress. It's about a culture that tolerates this kind of treatment day after day, year after year. And the only way to change it is to make people aware of what's really happening." Anita tilted her head, her curiosity piqued. "But how? We've tried speaking up before, but it doesn't seem to make a difference." Elon's eyes flickered with determination. "That's where I come in," This isn't just your fight anymore. You shouldn't have to carry this alone. I'll do whatever I can to make sure people hear your story." Marcus's skepticism was evident. And then what? People will talk about it for a while, maybe post a few hashtags, but nothing really changes. "Not this time," Elon said confidently. "When people see what happened here, when they see the way you've been treated, it's going to start a conversation. And if I have to use my platform to keep that conversation going, I will." Anita bit her lip, unsure whether to believe him. Years of disappointment had made her wary of promises, even from someone as influential as Elon Musk. "It's kind of you to say that," she said carefully. "But we've been let down before." Elon met her gaze, his tone unwavering. "I'm not here to let you down. I'm here to help. And I won't stop until people see the change we all deserve." Layla looked up at Elon with a small but hopeful smile. "Do you really think people will listen?" Elon smiled back. "If enough of us speak up, yes, they will." For the first time in years, Marcus and Anita allowed themselves to feel a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this moment could lead to something bigger, a step toward the justice and equality they had always dreamed of for their daughter. And sitting across from them was a man who seemed determined to make that dream a reality. By the next morning, the diner was at the center of a national firestorm. The viral video of Elon Musk standing up for the black family had garnered millions of views overnight. News outlets picked it up, plastering the diner's name and location across headlines. Social media exploded with debates, outrage, and calls to action. The initial reaction was one of overwhelming condemnation. Thousands of comments flooded the diner's online pages. Reviews, Facebook posts, and tweets denouncing the establishment. A wave of one-star reviews brought their ratings plummeting. The hashtags #DinerDiscrimination and #BoycottTheDiner trended worldwide, turning what the diner staff may have hoped was a small, local incident into a global controversy. In town, the fallout was immediate. Protesters showed up outside the diner, holding signs with phrases like "Racism has no place here" and "Equal rights for all." Some gathered in solidarity with the black family, while others aimed their frustration at the broader culture of discrimination. Cars honked as they passed, some in support and others in frustration at the traffic the protesters caused. Inside the diner, the mood was somber. The manager and the waitress from the previous day sat at a corner booth, heads lowered as they scrolled through the endless stream of backlash online. The owner paced behind the counter, his face pale and drawn. He had always thought of his diner as a simple business, a place where locals came for a bite to eat and nothing more. Now, it was being painted as a symbol of deep-rooted racism. "How bad is it?" the owner asked the manager. The manager looked up, her face a mix of frustration and guilt. "Bad. Real bad. People are saying we're racist. They're calling for us to shut down." The owner rubbed his temples. "We need to fix this. We need to apologize." The waitress, still reeling from her public humiliation, scoffed. "Apologize? For what? They're blowing this out of proportion. It wasn't a big deal." "It was a big deal," the owner snapped. "You turned them away in front of Elon Musk, for God's sake. Did you think nobody would notice?" The waitress shrank into her seat, muttering, "I didn't know it was him." "It shouldn't matter who it was," the owner said, his voice rising. "You humiliated a family. Now the whole world is watching, and we're paying the price." Meanwhile, outside the diner, the community itself was beginning to divide. Some residents sided with the protesters, expressing shame over what had happened and calling for the diner to make amends. Others defended the diner staff, arguing that the situation had been exaggerated and that Elon Musk's involvement had unfairly turned the spotlight on a small-town business. "I've known the owner for years," said one older resident to a local reporter. "He's a good man. This is all being blown out of proportion." A younger protester nearby shook his head in frustration. "It's not about the owner," he said. "It's about what happened here and what it represents. Racism is alive and well in this town, and it's time we do something about it." The diner owner eventually released a statement on social media, hoping to quell the outrage. The post read, "We deeply regret the incident that occurred at our diner yesterday. It was never our intention to make anyone feel unwelcome, and we are taking steps to ensure that this never happens again." "We are committed to serving all members of our community with respect and fairness." The response did little to appease critics. The apology was seen as hollow and insincere, especially since it avoided directly addressing the discriminatory behavior of the staff. In contrast, Elon Musk's brief yet powerful statement on his Twitter account garnered widespread praise. "Everyone deserves respect and dignity, no matter who they are or where they're from. Discrimination has no place in our society. Let's work toward a future where moments like yesterday are a thing of the past." The community's division deepened. Local businesses began to feel the ripple effects, with some facing boycotts for supporting the diner or its staff. Others displayed signs in their windows that read, "We stand for equality," to distance themselves from the controversy. In a town hall meeting held a few days later, emotions ran high. Some residents demanded accountability from the diner, including the termination of the staff involved in the incident. Others argued that the backlash was unwarranted and that the diner had already suffered enough. One resident stood up and said, "What happened wasn't just about the diner. It's about a culture in this town that allows people to look the other way when racism happens. If we don't address it now, when will we?" Another countered, "This is a witch hunt. People are losing their jobs over one mistake. Is that fair?" The meeting devolved into heated arguments, highlighting just how deeply entrenched the divisions in the town had become. For Marcus and Anita, the fallout was both a relief and a burden. On one hand, they were grateful that their story was sparking conversations and forcing people to confront uncomfortable truths. On the other hand, they were exhausted by the sudden attention. Reporters showed up at their home, asking for interviews. Strangers sent them messages of support, but also hateful comments, blaming them for the diner's troubles. "I didn't ask for any of this," Marcus said one evening as he sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through social media. "I just wanted to eat lunch with my family." Anita placed a hand on his shoulder. "I know," she said softly, "but maybe this is bigger than us. Maybe this is what needed to happen." Their daughter, Layla, looked up from her homework and asked, "Are people mad at us?" Marcus sighed, unsure how to explain the complexity of the situation to an 8-year-old. "Some are," he said honestly, "but a lot of people are on our side. They want to make sure this doesn't happen again." Layla nodded thoughtfully. "I'm glad Mr. Musk helped us." Anita smiled faintly. "So am I." As the days passed, the protests outside the diner continued, but the crowd began to shift from outrage to hope. Community leaders organized discussions about racial inequality and how to create a more inclusive environment. Some of the protesters worked to educate others about systemic racism, using the diner incident as a teachable moment. The diner, however, struggled to recover. Business dwindled as customers either joined the boycott or chose to avoid the controversy altogether. The owner eventually announced that the diner would close temporarily to reevaluate its policies and rebuild trust with the community. For the town, the fallout was a wake-up call. It forced people to confront not only the incident itself, but the deeper, underlying issues that had allowed such behavior to go unchecked. And while the path forward wasn't easy, it was clear that change was finally on the horizon. The viral moment at the diner quickly became more than just a local incident. With Elon Musk at the center of the controversy, the situation gained international attention, sparking conversations about racism and discrimination in ways no one had anticipated. Elon, never one to shy away from using his influence, decided to take deliberate and meaningful action. He recognized that while his intervention had made an immediate impact, the deeper issues required a sustained effort to bring about real change. In the days following the incident, Elon began by using his massive social media platform to highlight the issue. He didn't focus on himself. Instead, he amplified the voices of Marcus, Anita, and others who had reached out to share their stories of discrimination. He encouraged people to listen, learn, and take action in their own communities. His posts were concise but powerful, often directing people to organizations working to combat systemic racism and promote equality. Elon's followers, millions strong, engaged with his message, spreading it far and wide. Behind the scenes, Elon's team worked quickly to connect with advocacy groups and civil rights organizations. He personally funded several initiatives aimed at addressing workplace discrimination, education inequality, and economic disparity. One of his first actions was to establish a scholarship fund in Layla's name, designed to support underprivileged students pursuing STEM fields. The announcement of the scholarship was met with widespread praise, with many applauding Elon for turning a moment of outrage into a tangible investment in the future. But Elon didn't stop there. He reached out to Marcus and Anita, asking for their input on how he could help their family and others like them. Marcus was hesitant at first, still wary of being thrust into the spotlight, but after a heartfelt conversation with Elon, he agreed to share more of his experiences. Elon listened intently as Marcus described the challenges he had faced as a black man trying to secure stable employment in a predominantly white town. Anita spoke about the subtle but constant barriers she encountered in her workplace, where her hard work was often overlooked. Elon used their stories to shape his efforts. He arranged for Marcus to interview with a national auto repair chain, personally vouching for his skills and character. Within a week, Marcus was offered a position as a senior mechanic at a nearby branch, with better pay and benefits than he had ever received before. For Anita, Elon connected her with a diversity and inclusion advocacy group that provided her with mentorship and resources to advance her career. The group also worked with Anita's employer, initiating a review of their internal promotion practices. Elon's support for the family didn't stop at their immediate needs. He began collaborating with community leaders in the town, proposing long-term solutions to address the systemic issues that had come to light. One of his ideas was to fund a community center focused on education, job training, and cultural awareness. The center would offer workshops on topics like unconscious bias and inclusive hiring practices, while also providing scholarships and grants for local students. Elon believed that by investing in the town's future, he could help create a ripple effect that would extend far beyond its borders. As news of Elon's efforts spread, more individuals and organizations joined the movement. High-profile figures from various industries reached out to express their support, offering their resources and expertise to further the cause. A prominent filmmaker announced plans to create a documentary about the diner incident, using it as a lens to explore broader themes of racism and resilience. Musicians, athletes, and business leaders pledged donations to the initiatives Elon had started, turning what began as a single confrontation into a collective effort for change. Despite the positive momentum, there were challenges along the way. Critics accused Elon of using the incident to boost his image, while others questioned whether his efforts would lead to any meaningful change. Some residents in the town remained resistant, viewing the attention as an unwelcome intrusion into their lives. The diner's owner publicly criticized Elon, claiming that his involvement had unfairly ruined a small business. Elon, however, refused to engage in petty disputes. His focus remained on the larger goal, creating a world where families like Marcus and Anita's wouldn't have to endure the same struggles. One of the most significant outcomes of Elon's efforts was the cultural shift that began to take hold in the town. Schools started incorporating lessons on diversity and inclusion into their curricula, ensuring that young students like Layla would grow up with a better understanding of equality. Local businesses reviewed their hiring practices, committing to greater transparency and fairness. Community members who had previously stayed silent on issues of discrimination began speaking up, inspired by the courage of Marcus and Anita. Elon stayed involved throughout the process, often returning to the town to check on the progress of the initiatives he had helped launch. During one visit, he attended a community event at the new center, where Marcus and Anita were invited to speak. Standing before a packed room, Marcus shared how the incident at the diner had been a turning point for his family. While the experience had been painful, it had also opened doors they never thought possible. "We've spent most of our lives being told to stay quiet," Marcus said, his voice steady but emotional. "But sometimes you have to speak up. You have to demand to be seen and heard. And when someone like Mr. Musk stands with you, it reminds you that change is possible." Anita echoed his sentiments, thanking the community for their support and urging them to continue the work that had been started. "This isn't just about us," she said. "It's about making sure no one else has to go through what we did. It's about building a future where everyone is treated with the dignity they deserve." Elon sat quietly in the audience, listening as the family he had helped became advocates in their own right. He felt a deep sense of fulfillment, not from the accolades or the attention, but from knowing that his actions had made a real difference. As Layla took the stage to talk about her dreams of becoming a scientist, Elon couldn't help but smile. He saw in her the potential for a brighter future, one where the barriers she faced today would no longer exist. The movement that had started in a small diner was far from over. Elon knew that the fight for equality was a long and difficult journey, but he also knew it was worth every effort. With every step forward, he felt more confident that change was not only possible, it was inevitable. The diner incident rippled through the small town like an earthquake, shaking long-standing norms and forcing everyone to confront the biases they had either perpetuated or ignored. In the weeks following the viral video, the town became a focal point of national conversation, and with the spotlight came both progress and resistance. Protests outside the diner continued, but the tone gradually shifted. What had started as outrage began to evolve into a broader dialogue. Community leaders, church groups, and activists organized gatherings in the town square, inviting residents to share their thoughts and experiences. At first, only a few people showed up, many hesitant to speak openly about the town's history of racial inequality. But as the conversations continued, attendance grew. One evening, Marcus and Anita were invited to address the crowd. Standing in front of hundreds of townspeople, Marcus shared his story, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. He spoke about the countless times he had been passed over for jobs, the subtle and not-so-subtle ways he had been made to feel unwelcome, and the weight of shielding his daughter from the harsh realities of the world. "I'm not here to point fingers or make enemies," Marcus said. "I'm here to ask for change. Not just for my family, but for everyone in this town who has ever felt like they don't belong." Anita stepped forward, her voice trembling at first, but growing stronger with each word. "We love this town," she said. "We've built our lives here, and we want it to be a place where our daughter can grow up feeling safe and valued. But for that to happen, we need to be honest about what's wrong and work together to fix it." The crowd responded with applause, some people standing to show their support. Others remained seated, their arms crossed, unwilling or unsure how to engage. But the impact was undeniable. Conversations that had once been whispered behind closed doors were now happening in public spaces, and the community was beginning to reckon with its own reflection. The diner itself became a symbol of this transformation. After weeks of protests and declining business, the owner announced that the establishment would close temporarily for restructuring. This decision was met with mixed reactions. Some residents applauded the move, viewing it as a necessary step toward accountability. Others saw it as a capitulation to outside pressure, arguing that the town's identity was being eroded. When the diner reopened a month later, it was under new management. The space had been physically remodeled, but the most significant changes were less visible. The new owner, a woman named Clara who had grown up in the neighboring city, implemented strict policies to ensure fairness and inclusivity. She hired a diverse staff, including several members from underrepresented communities, and held regular training sessions on bias and customer service. Clara also worked with local activists to make the diner a hub for community events, turning what had once been a site of division into a space for unity. The transformation of the diner sparked similar changes across the town. Other businesses began re-evaluating their practices, recognizing that the incident had exposed not just one establishment's shortcomings, but a broader culture of complacency. Employers started conducting diversity audits, while schools introduced new curricula that emphasized inclusion and cultural understanding. The local government formed a task force to address systemic issues, focusing on everything from housing policies to law enforcement practices. Not everyone embraced these changes. A vocal minority resisted, accusing the town of bowing to political correctness and losing its traditional values. These residents organized their own meetings, framing themselves as protectors of the real town. Their rhetoric was often divisive, but it highlighted an important truth. Meaningful progress was rarely achieved without pushback. Despite the resistance, the momentum for change continued. Churches played a key role, with many pastors using their pulpits to preach messages of unity and compassion. One pastor, Reverend Thompson, became a leading voice in the movement. In his sermons, he spoke about the importance of repentance and reconciliation, urging his congregation to confront their own prejudices. "It's not enough to say, 'I'm not racist,'" Reverend Thompson said during one particularly moving sermon. "We have to ask ourselves, what am I doing to make this a better, fairer place for everyone?" Because silence is complicity, and love requires action. Among those deeply impacted by the changes was the town's youth. Layla, inspired by the events and her family's courage, became more outspoken in school, sharing her experiences and encouraging her classmates to think critically about how they treated others. Teachers noticed the shift, with more students participating in discussions about race, fairness, and empathy. A student-led initiative emerged to create a peer mentoring program, pairing older students with younger ones to foster understanding and mutual respect. Elon Musk's continued involvement lent credibility and visibility to the town's efforts. Although he didn't live there, he visited frequently, often quietly attending community meetings and offering his support without seeking attention. On one visit, he sat down with local leaders to discuss how technology could be used to bridge divides, from creating online forums for dialogue to providing digital resources for education. During one of these visits, Marcus and Anita hosted Elon at their home for dinner. Over plates of homemade lasagna, they spoke candidly about the town's progress and the challenges that remained. Marcus admitted that he still felt wary at times, especially when passing by residents who had openly opposed the changes. "It's not easy," Marcus said, "but it's worth it. I see the way people are starting to treat each other differently, even if it's just small things. And I know it's because we didn't back down." Anita nodded, her eyes shining with quiet determination. "We're not just surviving anymore," she said. "We're starting to thrive. And that's a feeling I didn't think we'd have in this town." Elon smiled, raising his glass. "To thriving," he said, "and to never giving up." The story of the town's transformation continued to gain attention, with media outlets revisiting the diner incident and documenting the changes that followed. A documentary crew spent weeks interviewing residents, capturing both the progress and the lingering tensions. When the film premiered at a national festival, it was met with widespread acclaim, serving as both a cautionary tale and a testament to the power of resilience and community. Over time, the town became a symbol of what was possible when people chose to confront their biases and work toward a shared goal. It wasn't perfect, no place ever was, but it was better. And for Marcus, Anita, Layla, and countless others, that was more than enough reason to hope. Months had passed since the diner incident, and the small town bore the marks of a community in transformation. The protests had long since faded, replaced by thoughtful conversations, new initiatives, and a cautious optimism about the future. What had once been a place defined by complacency was now grappling with the complexities of change, and in many ways, rising to the challenge. Marcus and Anita sat on their front porch one evening, watching Layla play in the yard. The air was crisp, the kind of evening that carried the scent of autumn leaves. Layla's laughter rang out as she chased a ball across the lawn, her backpack with its planets and stars forgotten for the moment. Marcus leaned back in his chair, exhaling deeply. "It's been a hell of a ride," he said, breaking the comfortable silence. Anita smiled faintly, sipping her tea. "That's one way to put it," she replied. "But for the first time in a long time, I feel like we're moving forward. Like we're not stuck anymore." Marcus nodded, his gaze fixed on Layla. "She's got a chance now. A real chance. That's all I ever wanted." Their reflections were interrupted by the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. The sleek electric vehicle was instantly recognizable, as was the man who stepped out. Elon Musk had arrived for the community event they were hosting that evening, a gathering to celebrate the progress that had been made and to reflect on the journey still ahead. Elon greeted them warmly, his demeanor as unassuming as ever despite the high-profile attention his involvement had brought. "Am I too early?" he asked, glancing at the house. "Right on time," Marcus said, shaking his hand. "Thanks for coming. It means a lot." Elon waved it off. "This isn't about me," he said. "This is about all of you and what you've accomplished." As the evening unfolded, neighbors, activists, and community leaders gathered at Marcus and Anita's home. The backyard, strung with fairy lights and filled with the hum of conversation, felt alive with possibility. Tables were laden with food contributed by friends and local businesses, many of whom had come to see the family not as victims, but as catalysts for change. Marcus stood at the head of the gathering, his voice steady as he addressed the crowd. "I won't lie," he began. "There were times when I wanted to give up, times when it felt like nothing would ever change, no matter how hard we tried. But what happened at that diner? It forced us to stop walking away. It forced us to stand up and to keep standing, even when it wasn't easy." He paused, glancing at Anita, who smiled encouragingly. "We couldn't have done it alone. The support we've received from all of you, from people we've never even met, it's been overwhelming. And it's made one thing clear. Change doesn't happen in isolation. It takes all of us." The crowd erupted into applause, and Anita stepped forward to add her own words. "This isn't just about one family or one town," she said. "It's about what we're willing to accept as normal, and what we're willing to fight for. We've seen what happens when people come together, when they choose courage over fear. And we're not done yet." Elon, standing quietly to the side, clapped along with the others, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. When the crowd encouraged him to speak, he shook his head at first, reluctant to take the spotlight. But with their insistence, he stepped forward. "I didn't do anything extraordinary," Elon said, his voice calm but firm. "I just spoke up when I saw something wrong. The real work, the hard work, that's been done by Marcus, Anita, and all of you. I'm proud to have played a small part, but the credit belongs to this community." He looked out over the crowd, his expression thoughtful. "This town has shown the world what's possible when people choose to confront their biases instead of ignoring them. It's not easy, it's not quick, but it's worth it." As the evening continued, the atmosphere grew lighter. Children played together in the yard, their laughter a reminder of why the fight for change mattered. Adults mingled, sharing stories and ideas for the future. The backyard felt less like a gathering of individuals and more like a family, a community bound by shared purpose and hope. Toward the end of the night, Layla approached Elon, her backpack slung over one shoulder. "Mr. Musk?" she said shyly. Elon crouched down to her level, smiling. "Yes, Layla. Thank you for helping my mom and dad," she said. "And for believing in me." Elon's smile widened. "You don't need me to believe in you," he said gently. "You got everything you need to do amazing things. But if you ever need help, I'm just a call away." Layla grinned, her confidence growing. "I'm going to build rockets one day," she declared. "I have no doubt," Elon replied. As the crowd began to thin, Marcus and Anita walked Elon to his car. The stars were bright overhead, a fitting backdrop for the sense of possibility that lingered in the air. "Thanks for everything," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "You didn't have to do any of this, but you did, and it changed everything." Elon shook his head. "It wasn't just me. It was you. The courage you showed, the story you shared. That's what made the difference. And that's what will keep making the difference." As he drove away, Marcus and Anita stood together in the driveway, watching the taillights fade into the distance. For the first time in years, they felt a sense of peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because they knew they were part of something bigger than themselves. The town wasn't just a place where they lived anymore. It was a place where they belonged. The journey wasn't over, but it was moving forward. And as they turned to head back inside, where Layla was waiting with her bright dreams of the future, Marcus and Anita knew that this was only the beginning of something extraordinary.